I thought fixing that ship would be just another job, until the door opened and the long-eared woman stepped out, and I realized she wasn't just the owner, she was a queen. That's when it hit me. This might be the most expensive mistake I've ever made, or the beginning of something far more dangerous. The station always hummed at a frequency that made most people uneasy, but he had long ago stopped hearing it. To him, the low vibration beneath his boots was just another reminder that things were working, or at least pretending to. He leaned back under the half-open engine housing of a battered cargo shuttle, tightening a bolt that had no business being as stubborn as it was. "Listen," he muttered, squinting at it, "you and I both know this is your last chance to cooperate." The bolt did not cooperate. He sighed, reached for a slightly larger wrench, and gave it the kind of look usually reserved for people who cut in line. The bolt gave in with a reluctant creak, and he grinned. "That's right, respect experience." Around him, Dock Ring 12 stretched in a quiet curve of dim lights and forgotten ships. Most mechanics preferred the central bays where the work was steady and the pay was better. He preferred it here. Less noise, fewer customers, and significantly fewer people asking questions he didn't feel like answering. Machines were simpler. They broke, you fixed them, and if they didn't like it, they didn't complain. Usually. He slid out from under the shuttle, wiping his hands on a cloth that had seen better decades when the station lights flickered. Not the usual tired flicker either. This one was sharp, deliberate, like the station had just blinked in surprise. He froze, head tilting slightly. "That's new." A distant sound rolled through the docking ring, not quite a rumble, not quite a whisper. It carried something else with it, something that didn't belong in metal corridors and recycled air. He frowned, tossing the cloth aside, and stepped out toward the main platform. The docking bay doors were opening. Slowly, too slowly. "Either that's a VIP arrival," he said to no one in particular, "or the system's about to apologize very badly." No announcement came. No docking clearance request. No frantic operator shouting into a console. Just silence, thick and waiting, as the doors parted to reveal something. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. The shape beyond the doors didn't quite settle into anything his mind recognized. It shifted subtly, like it was deciding what it wanted to be seen as. Smooth curves that weren't curves, edges that softened when he tried to focus on them. "Well," he exhaled, folding his arms, "that's definitely not standard." The ship, if it could be called that, glided into the bay without a sound. No thrusters, no visible propulsion, no heat distortion. It simply moved like it had politely asked space to step aside. He took a few steps closer, cautious but not afraid. Fear was useful, but curiosity paid better. The surface of the vessel caught the dim station lights and bent them in strange ways, like reflections that didn't quite agree with reality. For a moment he could have sworn it rippled under his gaze. "Yeah," he nodded slowly, "I'm charging extra." No response. No hatch opening, no sign of life. He circled the ship, hands on his hips, inspecting it the way he would any other job. If something showed up broken, it was his problem now. That was the rule, unwritten, unfair, and consistently enforced by his own sense of responsibility. "All right," he called out, raising his voice slightly. "Whoever owns this thing, you've got about 10 seconds to say something before I start fixing it without permission." He paused, listening. Nothing. "Great," he muttered. "Love a client who trusts me." He approached what looked like an access panel, or at least the part of the surface that seemed most likely to pretend to be one. He reached out, hesitated briefly, then tapped it with his wrench. The ship reacted, not dramatically. It didn't spark or alarm or eject him into space. It flinched. A subtle shift beneath his hand, like a muscle tightening. He blinked. "Did you just—" He tapped it again. The surface rippled slightly, almost offended. He stared at it for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay, good, we're establishing boundaries." Instead of stepping back, he leaned in closer, examining the reaction. His expression shifted from confusion to interest, the kind that usually meant something expensive was about to happen. "You're not metal," he murmured. Or at least not just metal. The ship remained still, but he could feel it now, that faint hum different from the station's constant vibration. This one was responsive. "All right," he said, straightening up, "new rule. If you bite me, I'm leaving." He pressed his hand flat against the surface. For a second, nothing happened. Then the panel changed. Not opening, no seams, no mechanical movement, but softening, reshaping itself around his touch until a narrow gap formed, like a doorway growing out of the hull. He stared at it. "You could have just done that earlier." There was no answer, but he stepped forward anyway. Inside, the air felt different. Cleaner somehow, but also heavier with something he couldn't name. The interior didn't resemble any ship he had ever seen. There were no wires, no exposed systems, no familiar structures. Everything flowed together in smooth, continuous forms, like the entire ship had been grown instead of built. "Okay," he said under his breath, definitely charging extra. He moved deeper, eyes scanning every surface, every faint glow of light embedded in the walls. The ship seemed to respond to his presence, subtle shifts guiding his path without forcing it. At one point, a section of the floor lit up beneath his boot, and he immediately stepped back. Nope, not falling for that. The light dimmed almost sheepishly. He narrowed his eyes. "You're doing that on purpose." Silence. "All right," he continued. "We're gonna have a professional relationship. I fix you, you don't mess with me. Simple." He followed the faint pull of the ship's interior until he reached what could only be the core. It pulsed faintly, a soft, steady rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. Now he stopped joking. The humor slipped away, replaced by focus. This was the part that mattered. He crouched down, studying the structure, tracing the patterns of energy that moved through it. They weren't circuits, not in any way he understood, but they behaved like them. Flow, interruption, imbalance. "All right," he murmured, reaching for his tools. "Let's see what's wrong with you." The ship responded with a faint shift, as if bracing itself. He smirked slightly. "Relax, I'm a professional." Then, after a beat, he added, "Mostly." He didn't rush. That was the first rule he had learned the hard way. Anything complex enough to confuse you was also complex enough to punish impatience. So instead of poking randomly at the softly pulsing core, he sat down cross-legged in front of it and just watched. "All right," he said after a moment, resting his elbows on his knees. "You do your thing, I'll do mine. Let's pretend we both understand what's happening." The core pulsed again, faint light traveling through vein-like structures embedded in the walls. It wasn't rhythmic in a mechanical sense. It felt reactive, like it was adjusting itself constantly. "Yeah," he nodded slowly, "you're not broken in the usual way." He reached into his tool belt and pulled out a small scanner, the kind that usually complained loudly when faced with unfamiliar tech. He activated it, holding it close to the surface. The scanner flickered, then froze, then displayed a series of symbols that were definitely not part of its programming. He stared at it. "You're kidding." The scanner beeped as if offended. "Don't look at me like that," he muttered. "You're the one having a meltdown." He tapped the device lightly. It responded by shutting itself off entirely. He let out a quiet breath. "Fantastic. I brought a tool to a conversation and it decided to leave." The core pulsed again, slightly brighter this time. He narrowed his eyes at it. "You did that, didn't you?" No answer, of course. But he was starting to get the feeling that silence didn't mean absence here. "Fine," he said, placing the useless scanner aside. "We'll do this the old-fashioned way, guesswork and mild panic." He leaned closer, studying the flow of energy. There were interruptions, tiny inconsistencies in the pattern, like a stutter in a heartbeat. Not constant, not catastrophic, but enough to matter. "All right, I see it," he murmured. "You're trying to compensate for something." He reached out, hesitated, then placed his hand near one of the faintly glowing channels. The moment his fingers hovered close, the structure shifted slightly, adjusting its shape as if acknowledging his presence. "Okay, that's still weird," he said quietly. Carefully, he traced the path of the energy flow, following it from the core outward. The ship responded, guiding him subtly like it wanted him to understand. At one point, a section dimmed under his hand. He froze. "Did I just break you?" The light flickered uncertainly, then stabilized. He let out a slow breath. "All right, we're both learning." Time passed, he wasn't sure how much. The station outside faded from his awareness, replaced entirely by the strange logic of the ship. He adjusted small things, not by replacing parts, but by encouraging the system to rebalance itself. Press here, wait there, observe, adapt. It felt less like repairing a machine and more like convincing it to heal. "Come on," he muttered at one point, leaning back slightly. "You're doing most of the work. I'm just moral support." The core pulsed a little brighter. He smirked. "See, compliments help." Far from the docking bay, beyond the thin veil of space, a silent observation chamber hovered in perfect stillness. She stood at its center, hands resting lightly behind her back, her gaze fixed on the projection before her. The ship's interior unfolded in intricate detail, every movement of the human displayed with precise clarity. He looked smaller from this distance, less significant, and yet her long ears tilted slightly as she watched him argue with a section of living circuitry. "I said stabilize," his voice echoed faintly through the feed, "not interpret that as a suggestion." For a brief moment something shifted in her expression. Subtle, almost imperceptible, amusement. One of the advisors behind her cleared their throat softly. "Your Majesty, the vessel's systems are recalibrating at an unprecedented rate." "Shall we?" "No," she said calmly. The advisor fell silent immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the human. He wasn't using advanced tools. He wasn't following any known protocol. By all measurable standards, what he was doing should not have worked. And yet the ship responded, not out of obedience, not out of command, but trust. She stepped closer to the projection, her gaze sharpening slightly. The faint glow of the ship's systems reflected in her eyes, revealing depths that carried the weight of centuries. "Curious," she murmured. Back inside the vessel, he wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a faint streak of grease. "All right," he said, exhaling, "progress, I think." The core's rhythm had stabilized noticeably. The earlier inconsistencies were fading, replaced by a smoother, more coherent flow. He leaned back, stretching slightly. "You know, for something that looks like it could outthink me in its sleep, you're surprisingly cooperative." The wall beside him shifted faintly. He glanced at it. "I'm taking that as a compliment." He stood up, walking slowly around the core, checking the surrounding structures. The ship felt different now, less tense, if that made any sense. "Yeah," he nodded to himself, "you were stressed." He paused, then added, "I get it. Happens to the best of us." The faint hum around him deepened slightly, no longer erratic but steady. He crouched again, making a final adjustment, pressing gently against a section that had resisted earlier. This time it responded immediately, aligning perfectly with the rest of the system. The core flared softly, not violently, not dangerously, just brighter. He blinked, pulling his hand back. "That better be a good sign." The light settled into a calm, steady glow. He waited. Nothing exploded. Nothing shut down. Nothing screamed at him in an alien language he didn't understand. He let out a long breath. "All right, I'm calling that a win." For a moment he simply stood there, listening to the now stable rhythm of the ship. Then he nodded once. "Yeah, you're good." Far away, she watched the moment in silence. The ship, her ship, had been failing in ways her most advanced minds could not fully diagnose. It had been brought here not out of desperation but necessity. And this human, he had fixed it. Not perfectly. Not in the way her people would have, but effectively. Her gaze softened slightly, though the weight behind it remained. "Interesting," she said quietly. Behind her, no one dared to speak. Back in the docking bay, he made his way toward the exit, pausing briefly to glance back at the core. "Try not to break again," he said casually. "I'm not always this available." The ship responded with a faint, almost imperceptible shift in its light. He squinted at it. Was that attitude? No answer. He smirked slightly and continued walking. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath, "definitely charging extra." He stepped out of the ship, expecting the usual silence of Dock Ring 12. The same dim lights and indifferent metal waiting for him to go back to his half-finished jobs and questionable life choices. Instead, the moment his boots touched the platform, the air felt different. Not heavier, not lighter, just aware. He frowned slightly, glancing around. "All right," he muttered. "Either I did a really good job or something's about to go very wrong." The ship behind him responded with a soft, resonant hum, no longer unstable, no longer uncertain. It sounded satisfied. Yeah, he waved a hand without turning around. "Don't get emotional. You're still paying." The docking bay lights brightened suddenly, not flickering this time, but aligning in a clean, deliberate sequence. He stopped mid-step. "That's new," he said slowly. Then he heard footsteps. Not echoes, not mechanical movements. Actual footsteps, light, measured, controlled. The kind that didn't belong to anyone who rushed or hesitated. He turned. For a moment, his brain tried to process what it was seeing in the simplest way possible. A woman. Just a woman, standing at the edge of the docking platform, framed by the soft glow of the ship behind her. Then the details settled in. Her posture, perfectly balanced, as if gravity itself had agreed to behave in her presence. The faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the air around her, like reality was being careful not to wrinkle. And her ears, long, elegant, curving slightly backward, unmistakably not human. He blinked once. "Okay," he said calmly, "that explains a lot." She stepped closer, each movement smooth, unhurried. Her gaze never left him, steady and precise, carrying a weight that most people would have felt immediately. He felt it too. And then he ignored it. "You the owner?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. There was a pause, not awkward, intentional. "I am," she said, her voice calm, layered with something that wasn't quite an accent but also not entirely familiar. He nodded once. "Good, we need to talk about your ship's attitude." Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, her expression shifted just slightly. Not confusion, not offense, something closer to curiosity. "My ship," she repeated softly, "has an attitude." "Oh yeah," he said immediately, gesturing back toward it. "Flinches when I tap it, ignores instructions, tries to be clever. Classic signs." The faintest hint of something passed through her eyes again. "Noted," she said. He folded his arms. "Also, I fixed it. I am aware." "Good," he nodded. "That means you're also aware that I saved you from a very expensive problem." She studied him in silence for a moment, not judging, measuring. "You approached a system you do not understand," she said, "with methods that should not have worked." "Yeah," he shrugged, "that happens a lot." "And yet," she continued, "you succeeded." He gave a small, crooked smile. I knew what I was doing the whole time, but sure, we can go with that." Another pause, then very subtly she smiled. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't transform her presence or soften her authority, but it was there, real, unmistakable. "I have encountered countless engineers," she said, "across many worlds." He raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. None of them talked to your ship like it was a stubborn customer." "None of them did," she admitted. "See." He pointed lightly. "That's where they went wrong." For a brief moment the tension between them shifted, not disappearing but changing. She stepped closer, now only a few paces away. Up close, the differences were clearer, not just her ears, but the subtle precision of her features, the depth in her eyes that suggested time measured differently. "You were not afraid," she said. He considered that, then shrugged. "Didn't seem useful. You did not know what you were facing." "Still don't," he replied easily. "But it was broken. That part I understood." Her gaze lingered on him, searching for something deeper than his words. "And now?" she asked. He glanced at the ship, then back at her. "Now I know it belongs to someone important enough to make the station nervous," he said. "And probably rich enough to pay my bill." There it was again, that almost smile. "You value simplicity," she observed. "I value getting paid," he corrected. A faint sound came from behind her, movement, distant figures at the edge of the bay, watching but not approaching. He noticed, of course he did. Your friends look like they're deciding whether to arrest me or applaud, he said quietly. They will do neither, she replied. Good, he nodded. I'm not dressed for either option. She stepped even closer now, close enough that the air between them felt charged, though not threatening. You have done more than repair a vessel, she said. He sighed lightly. Please don't say I've changed destiny or something. I just fixed a problem. You restored something that others could not, she continued, unbothered. That has value. He met her gaze directly, unflinching. Then pay me accordingly, he said. For a moment there was only silence. Then she laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't unrestrained, but it was real, and for someone like her it meant more than any grand reaction. You are unusual, she said. I've been called worse, he replied. She studied him one last time, then turned slightly, gesturing toward the ship. The surface responded instantly, shifting, opening in a smooth, fluid motion. Walk with me, she said. He hesitated for exactly half a second. Then he shrugged. Sure, but if this turns into a you can't leave now situation, I'm going to be very annoyed. That would be unwise, she said calmly. Good, he nodded. We're on the same page. They stepped inside together. The ship felt different now, alive in a way that was no longer unsettling but welcoming. The lights adjusted as they moved, the pathways opening naturally before them. He glanced around, then at her. All right, I'll admit it. This is impressive. It always was, she said. Yeah, but now it likes me, he replied. She did not argue with that. They reached the core again, its steady pulse filling the space with quiet energy. He stopped, looking at it with a different expression this time, not just curiosity but something closer to respect. You're stable, he said softly. The light responded, warm and even. He nodded once. Good. She watched him, noticing the shift. You speak to it differently now, she said. He shrugged. It's not just a job anymore. Then what is it? He thought about that for a moment. Something I understand, he said finally. That answer seemed to satisfy her. After a while they returned to the docking bay. He expected that to be the end of it. Payment, maybe a strange story to tell later, and then back to his usual routine. Instead, she stopped in front of him. You could leave, she said. He blinked. That's usually how jobs work. Or, she continued, you could come with me. He stared at her. That escalated quickly. There are systems beyond this one, she said. Machines unlike anything you have seen, problems that require your approach. He crossed his arms, considering. And what's the catch? No catch. He narrowed his eyes. There's always a catch. She tilted her head slightly. You would be compensated. Better be, he muttered. And she added, you would not be bored. He paused. That one landed. He glanced around the quiet docking bay, the same dim lights, the same half-finished jobs waiting for him. Then he looked back at her.